You'll
We
hit
are
record for
recording.
us. Okay, excellent. All right, well, welcome everyone. Welcome back to Kentucky's Project Scope, supporting children of the opioid epidemic. We are happy to have you all back. We hope you have had an opportunity to go ahead and sneak a peek at the both the topic that we're going to be covering as well as the case presentation today. So if this is, we do have, I believe, a couple of people that are joining us for the first time today. So if you do not mind, we would appreciate it if you could rename your Zoom box and just provide your first name, your last name, as well as the agency or organization that you are representing. And feel free to keep your video on if you're comfortable doing so, because that will just help us get to know each other a little bit better as we proceed through our 7-week series. So here are our topics that we still have yet to cover. As you noticed, we sent Emily was kind enough to send an alert yesterday that we did have to have a last minute switch due to circumstances that were out of our control. So thankfully, Jason stepped up to the plate and swapped weeks with Jennifer Grisham Brown. So today we are actually hosting Having Difficult Conversations, and next week we will return to Monitoring Child Development. So we just flip-flop those 2 weeks, but you'll get all the content that you need. And if for some reason you were really tuning in today and hoping for Monitoring Child Development, if for some reason you have a conflict for next week, we record all of the sessions and you'll be able to get that information through a recording. So no worries there. All right, kind of as our way of taking attendance and making sure we're capturing everybody's names, Brandon will go ahead and put up a poll for you to go ahead and just answer that question real quick. So again, we have 4 sessions left. We have Having Difficult Conversations, we have Monitoring Child Development, and then we have the trauma-informed intervention session, followed by the importance of peer support in recovery. So we have some really good topics coming up. Brandon, you'll have to let us know how long you want to keep that poll up for. There are a few people still trickling in, so.
I think we're good.
Okay. So do I click share results then? Or do you?
You can just X out of that or click share results if you want to show them.
Okay, we'll see. All righty. So it looks like, look at that, 80% have attended all 4. So 80% of you, that's wonderful. And we are, actually, we have an incentive for those of you that attend all 7 sessions. We'll have a choice of 4 different books that you can choose from if you're able to join us for all 4. So keep up the good work, that's awesome. All right, here is today's agenda. And again, I'm just kind of doing some recap of our procedures here. Then Jason will take over and introduce us to some good techniques for having difficult conversations. Then Jamie from Cardinal Hill has prepared a really interesting case for us to discuss in our breakout group. So she'll share the case and then we'll all head into our assigned breakout groups. We'll come back together to discuss lots of different strategies and resources and some possible solutions regarding the case that was presented. And then we'll wrap up with Emily with some reminders for us at the end. So here again are our wonderful facilitators and co-facilitators. So thank you to each of you for helping make this a successful series. If you don't mind, if you haven't done so already, go ahead and rename yourselves. Put your first name, your last name, and your agency in your Zoom profile. Feel free to join us in the chat conversation. Definitely take care of whatever needs you may have during this call, during this conversation. And then, of course, we always need to remember the importance of confidentiality. The session is being closed captioned, thankfully. So if that is something that you would benefit from or appreciate, feel free to click on that on the Zoom bar at the bottom. And hopefully you have noticed that we have a Slack discussion, I don't know, board, what do you call Slack? An app that we can kind of track some of our discussions and again, and add some resources too. So if you would like to participate in that, we would love to have you join us on Slack. If you have any questions about that, Emily is your go-to person. We've added many resources this past week. Some of you have even contributed some items and said, oh, share this flyer. Oh, here's some additional resources. There have been conversations about fetal alcohol syndrome that have come up, and we don't have a designated week for that. So we put up resources for you because that was a topic of interest to you. So feel free to check out the resources there. There's also resources about Learn the Signs, Act Early, which I posted in reference to the Jennifer's presentation. But if you want to get a jump start, feel free to take a look at those materials. If you have any questions about that, I would love to chat with you. If you need any help with technology, Brandon is your guy. And if you do get bumped off, then just use that same Zoom link. I know we had a number of people last week that had an issue. Hopefully today will go smoother, but it's just that same link and we'll just pop you right back into your groups. All righty, so I wanted to turn it over to Jason, who has been with us on previous sessions, and he is the director of the Pathways program at the University of Kentucky. So I would like to turn it over to him, and he will take us on a journey exploring having difficult conversations.
All right. Well, good to have everybody here today. I have a pretty simple presentation. I won't be doing a lot of slides, but hopefully have a little bit of discussion along the way, and go from there. I'm a storyteller. You can ask any of my staff; they will tell you. I like to tell stories, so hopefully we tell a few stories along the way as well. I am the program director for UK Pathways program, which is a prenatal program for women with substance use disorders. I've been there since 2016, I think, or it's where I'm at now. And so, but I've been with UK since 2011. And actually going to be talking a little bit about my role at UK prior to coming to Pathways. And it was one of the reasons I was aware of Pathways when it first launched off, because of my involvement in the hospital and doing brief interventions, which I think is a good reference point for this particular topic. So we can, yeah, there we go. So when we're talking about the idea of having difficult conversations, like what makes a conversation difficult? And so a couple items here you can see. Idea of sensitive topics. And what are sensitive topics? These are typically the topics that we don't generally talk about at a meet and greet kind of party, right? Things that are very personal in nature. So drug and alcohol use, not something that we tend to bring up in just casual conversation. Sexual practices, parenting practices. Nobody really likes to I mean, we may speak to our best friend about how that person parents their child, but we don't tend to talk to people about their parenting in our civilized society. Are there others? This would be a good thing on in your Zoom chat. What are some topics that you would see as a sensitive topic that you would feel uncomfortable and maybe broaching with people? I love to get, throughout this, get people's impact or impressions of that. And we'll see some of those come up. But sensitive topics would be certainly something that could lead to difficult conversations. The demeanor of a patient. And I say patient here, client, depending on or the person that you're talking with. The demeanor of a patient. We all have certain comfort levels with different behaviors that, so if we have an aggressive, somebody who's talking very aggressively or threatening or challenging, just, asking questions in a maybe aggressive way, or sometimes the challenging demeanor of a person is somebody who looks impaired or may have some intellectual difficulties or, all of those. We all have certain things that can trigger us a little bit to making us feel uncomfortable, and it can be the demeanor of a patient. Language and cultural differences can be, be an area. Obviously, we work in a multicultural, multilingual clinic at Polk Dalton, and it's interesting to see how our providers work with folks that are coming from different cultures, different languages, and overcoming those barriers. Luckily, we have some really good interpreters, but every culture brings its own way of worldview. And then when you try to, overcome different language barriers, that can be tricky. Education and knowledge base. Again, I think working in a place of academia or coming from, maybe some professional training, and then working with folks that maybe not have, who don't, speak or talk or acknowledge things the same way. A good example of that, I'll talk about doing brief interventions. It was pretty common when I would work with folks from different parts of the state when we would talk about alcohol. And I'd ask, and some of the questions we'd ask them was about how many drinks of alcohol they would have in a day as part of their, this brief intervention conversation. And a lot of folks were like, oh, I don't drink alcohol. I just, drink 6 or 7 beers a day. And their knowledge base, their concept of alcohol was something different than the way we see it. But, so even just overcoming that conversation, that the gap of the way we looked at things, from a very academic, alcohol is alcohol, but from somebody who's coming from a different area, alcohol and beer are 2 different separate things. So we have to kind of know in having those conversations that we may be coming from different points of references. And then any other issues, and I'll leave that up to you guys. What are some other issues that you would see that could make a conversation difficult with a patient?
Jason, do you want to hear some of these chat? There's some really
yes. What are some of the ones?
trauma history,
double track all those.
trauma, politics as relates to healthcare, initial diagnosis of a disability, drug use in the home by a partner, the role of spirituality, finances, income, interpersonal violence, self-abuse. Do you like to read rather than, can you read? Those are all great topics.
Yeah, exactly. How do you go about, and so just recognizing that we're going to come into these conversations from different worldviews, from different experiences, and having all these different factors, and yet we're face to face with somebody that we need to talk about something with, and that brings us to diving headfirst into difficult conversations. That was actually me when I first started in the field. I've just been at this a long time. And I have been in the field for quite a while, and you would think, being trained as a marriage and family therapist, and having also training and as a drug and alcohol counselor at the undergraduate level. And I've been doing this for a long time, that you would think that this would be, difficult conversations would be really easy. But when I took the job at UK Healthcare back in 2011, I came on as a brief interventionist as part of the Bell Consultation Service. And the idea then was to provide brief interventions for patients that were identified with at-risk alcohol and substance use. And this is kind of a one and done kind of a venture. So I was doing about 1,000 of these a year. I kept a spreadsheet and tracked some of this data. And so I'm meeting about 1,000 patients in a year. And each time it was kind of an opportunity to have what I call the pause of apprehension. Every time I get ready to go into a room, there's that pause of, oof, what am I getting myself into? What am I going to say? How am I going to respond? And I want to say that because even though I could probably do brief interventions in my sleep by the time I got done with this, there was always that time when you get ready to see somebody face to face for the first time, and then brief interventions oftentimes the last time, that that there's this, what comes over you is this little bit of apprehension, a little bit of anxiety. And I want to point out that that's normal. That's normal. Difficult conversations. There'd be something pretty wrong with you, probably your makeup as a human being, if you kind of really enjoy just jumping right into difficult conversations, right? I think if you care about people, you generally tend to feel a little uncomfortable when you have to jump into something uncomfortable. And I think that's a big part of it. But part of it is also then learning to becoming comfortable with the uncomfortable. And recognizing and having that self-awareness of, like, what are the things that do make me uncomfortable as I go into a conversation? And how has my experiences in the past of overcoming these uncomfortable moments, how has that prepared me for what this conversation that I'm getting ready to have? And a lot of that would happen almost instinctually as I would get ready to go into a thing. But it's just awareness of that I think is really important. So that takes us into what I was doing at UK for those first few years. Is, again, I think is a good model for the type of model that we're going to talk about for having conversations. But what is ESPER? And so the first part of that is an acronym. The first part is screening. If you hit it again, and so it's using evidence-based screening tools in primary care settings. And I think this is really important. When you're getting ready to have difficult conversations, I think there's a lot of times if you can find screening tools. So if it's about drugs or alcohol, or if it's about physical abuse or sexual abuse or whatever, the ACE scores, adverse events that have happened in childhood, whatever those kind of evidence-based screening tools, those are become a really good, kind of a good talking point. And I'm always a big thing. If you're going to apply a screening tool, you better talk about it. I don't like it when people just put papers in front of people and expect them to fill out, and then they just set them aside and we never come back to them. If we're going to if a patient and a client's going to take the time to fill out the screening tool, we better be referencing that. Even if it's just to say, hey, I looked at your anxiety score and it looks like that's not something you are struggling with currently. Is that accurate? And we go from there. Biological screens, something that we used in the hospital, drug screens, and so sometimes that was our talking point, what was in their system. And again, whatever you use as a screening tool, I think it's good to have some of those in place that can help normalize and enter into those conversations and give you a reference point for these kind of conversations, if that's applicable. Then the brief intervention, and that's really kind of the meat of this. The idea of a brief intervention was, the goal is to educate and to motivate, is to look for that change. And we're going to talk about that as we talk about the trans-theoretical model of change. And we're going to address risky and unhealthy behaviors. And so that was the whole bit of the brief intervention. These were really designed to be done in about a 10 to 20 minute kind of thing. Mine tend to go about 30 or 40 minutes a lot of times, sometimes shorter. And then the option for referral to treatment. So if through the brief intervention there's an opportunity to refer somebody onto an appropriate level of treatment or intervention, then we do that. And again, the idea is linking from the primary care setting, so whether this was a clinic or in this case the hospital, and then get them into specialty treatment services, whether it was mental health services or substance abuse services. And again, a warm handoff is absolutely preferred. Now that wasn't always possible and sometimes in some settings, but whenever we can be linking people from our primary settings into kind of specialty services, calling for them, connecting them with a person on the other end of the line, and having an appointment and the time, the very next step for that patient, if that's appropriate, again, in the where they're at in their change. So when we look at what an SBIRT was, it was SAMHSA kind of defined this in their white paper that they put out in 2011 as a comprehensive integrated public health approach to delivery of early interventions for individuals with risky alcohol and drug use. And then to be able, again, to help make, so it's that intervention and it's that interview that you have with that person, and then when appropriate to help make appropriate referrals to treatment. But it also had applications, and that's the thing that they looked at. It had applications for tobacco use and smoking cessation or reduction, for depression, for anxiety and trauma and anxiety disorders. Again, identifying those and help linking people to the right kind of services is another aspect of SBIRT. So it wasn't just limited to drug and alcohol. And this is what's going to kind of get us into these two different models that work very good in overlay when we talk about having difficult conversations, is this idea of motivational interviewing, which if anybody has been trained in that, it's an excellent tool to use. It's used by a lot of counselors and therapists, but it can be used by lay people, and they have trainings for that. So definitely, if there's an opportunity to get trained in motivational interviewing and you're working with people, I would go for it. It's a very excellent tool to have in your tool belt. On top of that, though, is this idea of the stages of change. And the two of those overlap really well to make a really comprehensive approach to having conversations with people. And so we're going to see how those two really marry up really well together. So we look at what is motivational interviewing. Motivational interviewing was developed by Miller and Rolnick, coming out of the Carl Rogers client-centered therapy. And if you know anything about Carl Rogers, you know his approach was a very non-directive, positive regard, allowing the client to kind of share with you, and you gave a lot of verbals and nonverbal reinforcement. It wasn't very directive, though. And so it can feel like a very long process. If you've ever worked with a Rogerian therapist, it feels like you're doing a lot of the work, and you are if you're the client. And they're there doing a lot of that kind of stuff. So, but it has some really good foundation. Carl Rogers is still foundational, I think, his approach to any therapy style. With motivational interviewing, though, they've added it becoming more of a directive approach to help kind of guide and direct the conversation, which allows it to be briefer than a typical therapy session would be. It's a therapeutic style rather than a bunch of techniques. So we're not going to teach a lot of techniques, but it's just kind of a style of doing and interacting with people. And the whole idea is to help clients explore and resolve their ambivalence to change. And we're going to really focus in on that word ambivalence, because I think a lot of times we have a different concept of what ambivalence looks like when we're talking about patients and their perspective. So we get to some of the key central principles of motivational interviewing. Some of these are pretty self-explanatory, but expressing empathy, again, coming out of that Rogerian model, empathy being one of the huge cornerstones for any counseling, really. Developing discrepancy. And so we're going to, this is the key to help us kind of figure out what things don't match in a person's, in their worldview, and their value base. We're going to help kind of figure out how things, if I'm using drugs, but being a mom is important to me, how do those things not matching up? And we're going to start to figure out some of those things. And we talk with patients. Rolling with resistance, not getting pulled into the weeds by responses that aren't what we would like for them to be responding back with. I'm kind of rolling with the resistance, supporting self-efficacy. At the end of the day, letting our clients or the people we're working with to respect the fact that where they're at is where they're at, and that we're all moving, we're all changing, we're all growing, and that we should be able to, we can make good decisions for ourselves, and we should have the space to do that and to value that. It may not be what we want or when we want it for our clients and the people we're working with, but at the same time, we're in that process of exploring and changing with them, and that's that supporting that self-efficacy. Examining resolution and ambivalence, examining and the resolution of ambivalence. Again, we're going to go back to what this word ambivalence is as it pertains to kind of having these conversations, and then this avoiding the arguing. Expressing empathy. Again, I think we take this for granted, that somehow that we've all learned this and in our basic. But expressing empathy, it's more than just repeating the words that a person is saying. It's really showing an interest. I mean, behind it, there has to be a genuine interest in caring for that person, showing that unconditional positive regard, as Rogers would call that. Trying to understand the client's experience, and to be able to package that with our responses so that they come back to the patient. I was very fortunate to be trained by somebody who I consider kind of like the guru of empathy. Mary Ortwine did a lot of my marriage and family training as an associate. And I remember when I was really early in the field, I was doing home therapy, and I was working with this teenage girl that we were working with that was on this diversion program. She was at day treatment, and I would see her at school sometimes, and then I would also do home visits. And I just happened to catch her at a bad day. Came to her house that evening, thought, okay, we have a really good session, and she didn't want to talk to me. I remember very clearly, I was kind of standing in her kitchen. Her mom and grandma had allowed me in the house, and I heard that she was just, having a bad day at school, and she didn't want to talk. And, and here I am armed, new therapist, I'm armed. I want to give some empathy today. I'm ready for some good empathy. I'm going to do it. And she didn't want to talk to me. And so I stood there, and I remember talking with, say, hey, would you like to talk? And she kind of rolled over, on her bed as surly teenagers will do, if you have any. I have one now. I know what that looks like on a regular basis. And, and so I finally said, you know what? I think you just don't feel like talking right now. And you've probably had a pretty rough day, and maybe you just need your space. And so I'm just going to sit out here in the kitchen. And, I've got some things to do. I'm just going to give you your space, because I think that's what you're really kind of expressing to me right now. So I came back. So I'm like, wow, this sucks. I'm not able to talk. And eventually she came out of her room. We sat down. We had a bit of a conversation, and I got a sense of what was really eating at her. I remember coming back to supervision that day, or later on that week, and meeting with Mary, and I said, I don't think I did a really good job with this. I mean, she didn't want to talk. I didn't know what to do. I just sat in the kitchen, I was waiting her out, I guess. And Mary reminded me that empathy is more than just using our words. Oftentimes, empathy is about empathy in action. Sometimes we just need to be in the action of giving empathy. And I'm reminded of that when we meet with our patients that came in, like the one that I saw this past week, who was having, obviously going through withdrawal and not feeling well. And I could tell that everything on her was hurting. And I just said, hey, can I just shut off the lights? And I'll bring you a water. And we can talk later. Let's just try to get you feeling, let's get you the doctor in here. And let's just try to see if we can get you feeling better today. Sometimes our empathy needs to be not just the reflective words, but a reflecting of that we see their need and we're responding to that need in that moment. So talk about rolling with resistance. Again, a lot of times I think people think that when we're having these difficult conversations, we're coming in with an agenda to make them change, and maybe a change that they're not ready for. I'm not ready to quit drinking. Don't come in here and talk to me about my drinking. I don't want to quit smoking pot. Don't come in. I'm never going to change. We didn't even got there yet. We didn't even know. I don't know if pot even is something we need to even be worried about. What are your thoughts about pot? Let's talk about how that is. And so sometimes rolling with resistance is oftentimes stepping back. And again, going back to empathy, giving some simple reflections, listening to what their concerns are, where they're maybe not ready to embrace a certain agenda, and that's okay. We want to release our agenda and enter into where they're at. And so that's kind of the piece of rolling with resistance. Again, simple reflection. Well, I like the first part is just approaching resistance with non-resistance. This is not even call it resistance. They're not being resistant. They're being cautious. Maybe there's a lot at stake here. To make a decision to make change also means, potentially to fail. And so let's acknowledge that, reflecting what the client says and try to be neutral. Again, it's not word for word. And we want to kind of capture their emotional responses when we reflect things back. We also want to validate, and this is something I learned in doing couples counseling. Acknowledging and validating. So what we do in couples counseling, a lot of times we teach couples, this was something that Mary Wertwein was teaching in relationship enhancement therapy, is that we would teach couples how to give empathy to each other. And sometimes they would get it wrong. And as therapists, we get it wrong, and as providers, we get it wrong. And so we may try to give a reflective response, and then they'll be like, no, that's not what I was thinking. I was thinking, and then they go, and that's okay. One of the things we have to be okay with is if somebody is correcting our reflective statement, they're giving us more information. They are pouring out to us they're going to give us more to go by. And so they may be correcting, and sometimes they may even come back and land on the very same thing that we said, kind of reflected back to them. But when they correct us in our reflections, that's okay. What they're giving us is more information, and more information helps us enter into the conversation better. Sometimes we just need to shift the focus a little bit, diffuse the resistance by helping the client shift away from the barriers and obstacles. Let's see. And also focusing on their strengths and their positives in their life. And then, this idea to say, well, maybe you're just not motivated to do this. We don't want to come in at it like that. That's counter motivational. What we maybe is looking at what are the hesitations, and what are the pros and cons. What's it going to cost you to change? What's it going to cost you to not change? One of the things that I oftentimes do in talking with folks about their substance abuse, I want to know about, what does that do for you? What does it do for you when you take a Xanax? What does it do for you when you drink? What would life be like without that mechanism for you? One of the best things I was ever trained in was step 2 of the 7 challenges. It was a kind of a treatment program for adolescents primarily. But that whole journal in step 2 was, what do you like about drugs and alcohol use? Because it serves a purpose. And if we can understand what that purpose is, then we help us get better at understanding what's it gonna cost you if you change that, and what is gonna be, what do we need to put in its place if that were to change. So we get to ambivalence. Again, I just told us we kind of get back to that concept, but ambivalence is a state of mind that a person is having conflicting feelings about something. Okay, it is not that they don't care; it's that they actually care about two maybe opposing things. Ambivalence is that they have a conflict between choosing two courses of action. And so that's where we're at. Ambivalence may be, it's not that I'm ambivalent. Say I'm working with somebody who I really feel like would benefit from residential treatment because maybe outpatient treatment isn't, meeting their goals of sobriety. Ambivalence isn't that they don't want to go to residential treatment, is that they may see the value of residential treatment, but they also means that they're going to have to give up something too. They may have to give up control. They may have to, who's going to take care of my pets? Who's going to, how's my car payment going to get made? Ambivalence can be those things that it's that they care about things that may just aren't matching up. And how do we kind of, sort all that out?
Jason, you're at the 4-minute mark.
All right, I'll move it along. I think we're doing pretty good though. Developing discrepancies. Again, this becomes really helpful in helping identify what are some of the values that the client holds, and how is that you may be bumping up against some of their current behaviors. Again, I think that the common thing is, if we're working with a mom who is smoking marijuana, we're not going to kick her out of our program. We're going to work with her. That's how we work in our program. And yet it's probably going to cause her some issues down the line, probably with child protection services and employment and all that. So, but we have some moms that come in very adamant. I'm not going to change it. I've given up heroin. I've given up all this. But I'm not going to give up my marijuana. I don't care what anybody says. I think it should be legal and all that. And you could get into you could get into this tit for tat about trying to, well, let's talk about, why it should be legal, shouldn't be legal. I mean, we don't go there, because at that point how is that going to fit in your life? And so some of the conversations we have are, what's it going to mean if you have to deal with child protection services? What would that look like? What does that mean for you and your work? And if you do change, what have you noticed in the past? Like if you've gone a period of time, and what did that look like? What did that feel like? And what you find is that sometimes people who have these really strong convictions, they also have some examples of where it's not working. And so we kind of explore those, what works, what doesn't work. And what do you anticipate, what it change? The other thing that, when I'm working with parents is, okay, so maybe this isn't something that you want to change in your life. How would you feel with your kids doing some of these behaviors? Because, toddlers turn into teens really quick. Sometimes too quick. I know I have both on both ends. And how would you feel about them picking up smoking? What do you feel about that? And so, kind of helping them to identify those values and their behaviors that aren't matching up well. Let me switch to the next one. Again, supporting self-efficacy all the way along. We've got to give our clients the opportunity, the people that we're working for, to try things on, to do things that may or may not work. We may, and I've seen, and we do this a lot. I may be thinking this person needs IOP or residential treatment. They would just like to try to come to more treatment groups at our. And so we said, okay, let's try doing that. Let's try doing, 4 treatment groups a week and see how that goes. Well, that didn't exactly happen, and so we come back and reevaluate. But we let them kind of have a choice, some decision, that dialogue about what would it take to start to make some of those changes. We can go avoiding arguing. I like this. Resist lecturing. Ask to educate. You know, would you like to know about what smoking does to you and the fetus? Would you like to, ask them if it's okay to educate. If they say yes, then you have an open door. Sometimes we just go right into lecturing mode, and that person's like, I didn't even want to know this. But when they've asked you, yes, I would like to know more about it, you've got an open door. The other thing is, when arguing and you're in a tug of war, best way to get out of that battle, let go of the rope. Just let go of the rope. Sometimes we're holding on a lot tighter and doing a lot more pulling, and we just need to be letting go and modeling that for the folks we work with. Again, we look at motivational interviewing, and then we bump it up against the model of change. This is where things really work well together. And when we're looking at the model of change, we can switch on over there. We're looking at Prochaska's and De Clemente's theoretical model of behavior change, which is a lot. But basically, it's looking at how people make change, and this came out in the 1984, and in regards to the process of behavior change for addictive behavior. So they noted that people fall in kind of these categories of pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, and maintenance, and that relapse can be a part of that process too, that people can relapse back into old addictive behaviors and then come back either in a pre-contemplative, contemplative, preparation, action, or maintenance stage, or mostly action stage, come back in at a different point in that circle. And that relapse can be part of that process. We can work. There's learning that can happen with relapse and where they re-enter. But it's important to recognize that people move through stages of change, and that's the next thing. And that we match our response to the stage that they're currently in. So if somebody is pre-contemplative, we don't want to try to push for them to make some kind of major action, get into kind of a treatment, go into a rehab program. They haven't identified they even have a problem yet. So now we're going to help them, the awareness of that problem. If they're contemplating, we want to help raise that awareness and talk about the ambivalence. Why would they take action? Why would they not take action? What would change? What wouldn't change if they, if we stayed the course, and what would that look like? And then preparation is, when we see somebody ready to start making changes, they're thinking through what that would be. Maybe I do need to cut back my smoking. What would that look like? And then we just encourage those steps and we facilitate that, and then action is when they've made that definitive step, then we're reinforcing that definitive step. We're out guiding that. Maintenance is, again, checking in. What did you learn? How's this working? What have you gotten from this process? And then relapse would be another part that we would go back and help them kind of get back on track. What did you learn from this relapse back into? So when we look at motivational interviewing and the stages of change, again, now we've got this really good framework for how we can help people through difficult conversations. And the idea is that, that we help people make from one step of that change, that model of change, say from pre-contemplation to contemplation, or from preparation to action. If we can move a person from one increment to another, we've done something good. And we can drop the mic and it's good. We'll do it. We'll pick up the next week, right? And that's always the goal. That was the goal of Brief Interventions. It's the goal in working with patients and clients as we get to see them. It's if we can help a person make one little incremental change in part of their life through a conversation, and we've done something that's going to be helpful. And we've moved from a difficult conversation into a productive conversation. So there you go. And I think the last slide, the references and my contact information.
Well, that was really, really great. Thank you so much, Jason. And we appreciate that that presentation and that quote I wrote down, that being uncomfortable being comfortable with the uncomfortable. Yeah. I mean, I've been in that situation, not thousands of times like you, but, and I do think that the case that is shared with us today, to me, when I read through Jamie's case, I'm not sure if you got the chance to do it, but it almost had like two difficult conversations built into one case. I mean, the one that was clearly laid out was the conversation with the family. And then there was also kind of a sub-story there as far as the birth mom and the decisions that she was confronted with. So I wanted to thank you for your presentation, and we will look forward to, are you able to stay on with us for the rest of the call today? And maybe you can hear some of the solutions, and we would love to hear your opinions and your thoughts on some of the solutions that our breakout groups come up with. So from here, we'll turn it over to Jamie, and if she could tell us about this family that she is currently working with.
Hey everyone. So I have the privilege to work with this sweet little boy. He is 4 years old. So a little background on him is that he was adopted at 3 days old. So really early adoption, and it was a private adoption. It wasn't related to any kind of foster care situation. So rewind a little bit, the birth mother, the history that was provided when we took this child as a patient was that the birth mother had been in jail for a large portion of her pregnancy. What we don't know is exactly when she was put into jail, or when she went to jail, and any kind of drug use she did prior to that. What we do know is that she spent a large amount of time in jail and that she was released 3 weeks before the child was born. And during that time, she used methamphetamines daily, and she smoked marijuana daily. So that was about 3 weeks of exposure, at least, that we know of regarding the child. And I do know the parents had shared that they got a little information from the birth mother, like interview-wise, and she was asked by the adoption agency, you know, do you have any supportive family? It was really a counseling, I guess, more so for them coming in to see if she could potentially parent this child. She'd had several children prior to this child, and I do not believe any of those children were in her care due to history of drug use. So I believe they were scattered about the system, and she was 40. I do know that the birth mother was older with this child when she had him. So she really led that there weren't really any supports for her. I don't know if you would call it homeless, but she lived with a woman that that wasn't related to her. She did not have any job. She did not have any car, things like that. And the plan was for her to parent this child with the birth father, but once she was placed in jail, he left the scene and really had no contact with her after that. So I don't know what made her choose the route she did. Obviously, we didn't get to talk with her, but she did choose private adoption, and this family took the child 3 days after he was born. I do know that he was in the NICU. From what I know, he didn't experience any or didn't exhibit any kind of withdrawal other than being lethargic and not necessarily wanting to eat the way that the physicians wanted him to eat. So he did have a feeding tube, and but they got him off of that pretty quickly. So other than that, he met all milestones all the way up. He did well in daycare system. And it was, from my understanding, about 3. We didn't get him till 4, but about 3, he started to exhibit some difficulties socially. So, oh, I'm sorry. If you want to go back, before we talk about that, he has lovely parents, and they actually have him enrolled in a private Montessori preschool. And I don't know if you guys really know the Montessori way, but it's more child directed, so they can choose the activities, and they really can progress as an individual versus kind of a classroom style progression. They can progress more individually. And he is a very bright child, on a side note. Okay, next slide, sorry. So major concern is that when he gets frustrated, he hits. And he's really an equal opportunity hitter. It could be an adult or a child. But he really has a short fuse. So, and then if he gets in trouble, he can run, and he can get away pretty quickly, and he's a fast little booger. So, so that's one of the things. The other thing is getting him to transition from one activity to another. So he has preferred activities that he loves, as we all do. We could spend hours doing things, but when it came to recognizing letters or things like that, he wanted no part of it. And so he really didn't want to leave the preferred activity to go do something that was less preferred. And the parents also said that he exhibited this like when it was time to leave the park, or when it was time to leave something fun, a birthday party, we would have a meltdown. So they came to us. They had already had several meetings with preschool teachers, and they suggested maybe he needs occupational therapy for some sensory related things. And the parents were really fearful of him being asked to leave that preschool setting. And I don't know about any of you all and your experiences, but if you have a biter or a hitter, it's not very comforting for parents, because there is a chance of getting kicked out of daycares and preschools. So for us, we had a lot of things that we wanted to work on, helping the child learn how to regulate themselves and control emotions during frustrating times. And then making sure that we work with the preschool teachers so that they know maybe how to redirect those behaviors, maybe in a different way that won't cause such an escalation of behaviors. So, and that really is one of the barriers, just as an occupational therapist, that I just see with toddlers a lot, is that if you don't have that typical child in the classroom, oftentimes the staff don't know how to handle any kind of difficult situation like this. And then another thing, the family really wanted him to stay in that Montessori environment. I think they know how bright the child is. And I'm an adoptive parent too. And and even as, a parent, you never want to think that your child can't do something, right? So, it was difficult conversations to have with, maybe this isn't the right environment for your child. There's other environments out there that could maybe benefit where he is right now. It doesn't mean that he can't do that later in life, but right now, what's best for him. And they were super great. Both parents on board. You know, you talk a lot about another difficult conversation was parenting. Like, how are you disciplining, making sure both parents were on board with what, or they both agreed with what style they wanted to choose. And they
Well, you
wanted
know
to
what,
have
Jamie? I think, can you tie up this case so that we have
Yeah.
time to go
Yeah.
head into breakouts and
Yeah.
get you some good ideas? Thank
Yeah,
you.
and the other thing was they had very minimal conversations with the birth mother, but they did have some. So there was some things to build on from that.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing this case with us. Brandon is going to send us into breakout rooms until like 3:10. So we'll have some time to head into the breakout rooms with our similar groups. So feel free to take a picture of this slide with your phone if that will help you have a visual of some of the talking points when you get to your group. Otherwise, your facilitators also have those questions. So we'll give you a 5-minute reminder and then maybe a 1-minute reminder, and then we'll come back as a group and share our kind of discussions and our resources and our thoughts about this particular case. So thank you. Enjoy your small groups, everyone. I think, are we all back in, Brandon? Are we still trickling in?
We got a couple
Okay.
hang-ups, but I think everybody should be back.
All right. Well, thank you for those conversations, and I look forward to hearing from each of the groups. So, and then Jason, we'll have you kind of tie us up after some of these initial conversations and hear your impressions and ask you for some feedback there. So I see Kate on my screen. She's one of our facilitators. So I'm not sure if you would like to share or if there's someone within your group that would be comfortable sharing. Either way is fine, but we would just love
Well, I got voted in by silence, so I agree.
And that's fine. If there is, anyone is welcome to share, but we would just like to hear from someone within the group.
Well, I was joking with them and said that please jump in, because if I miss something, I want to make sure that that we all can share that information. So there were a lot of strengths. We saw that the adoption at 3 days to a supportive family is a huge strength, that the early milestones were met, that it really seemed that the parents were open to discussing new ideas, even related to parenting, that they were seeking professional help, and that there also seemed to be quite a bit of collaboration with the teachers. So there must have been a number of conversations had with the teachers so far. Being in the Montessori program is also very helpful because of the way that self-direction and self-directed play is utilized. That may be helpful in reducing some of the challenges for the behavior. Strategies include visual scheduling for transitions, cues for transitions, first we will, and then statements, having non-preferred activities come before preferred activities.
That's a good one.
Perhaps looking at a sensory diet, adding small choices, a calming corner. Also maybe comparing what are the parents seeing at home for behavior and what is the school seeing at school, and how do those match or mismatch, and then have the family define coping skills. So what is acceptable rather than this is what you can do, and perhaps sharing some of the expectations through social stories. Resources, we thought the early childhood mental health program could be very helpful, and they have access to both Connect the Dots and Conscious Discipline, which a lot of the strategies, if you're familiar with Conscious Discipline, they fit with the Conscious Discipline curriculum. So I think that's it in a nutshell for us.
That's great. And the list of the early childhood mental health specialists is in our resource folder. So if you are looking, or if you're wondering what this Connect the Dots is, or if you want to dig a little deeper into that, that would be a great place to find out who your local early childhood mental health specialist is. All right. I'm trying to think who else would like to step up and share. Can I have a volunteer?
I can
I'll
go.
go ahead and share for our group if that's okay.
That works. Thank you.
You're welcome. Our group came up for strengths. We came up with very supportive parents as well. He had access to very good resources as far as the OT and the PT, and he is a Montessori student, so that also opens him up for numerous resources as well. Strategies that our group came up with were maybe to set very clear, strong boundaries, like this would be allowed at this time, but not at this time. Have a more structured environment, both at home and school, and have a more open, caring dialogue with the teachers and the parents at the school. A behavior plan, OT with a mental health background, and also have access to more of a mental health professional if needed be. Some resources that he've already had access to, the OT, the early childhood mental health we came up with as well. And some suggestions were get the child to be monitored through parent-child interaction therapy. One of our participants was explaining to us how that works and how that helps notice a child's behavior through play and see if there was any sort of trauma that he could have experienced prenatally that he would be acting out on through play, right?
Yeah, it looks
And
like
then
people
again,
are
more
agreeing
open
there.
and concise and good communication between the teachers and parents.
Well, thank you. Those are some really good suggestions, and we'll go ahead and compile these suggestions and put them in the folder. So if you're intrigued by, PCIT, then you can go look that up and learn more about that. I'm noticing a comment from Ebony, who was wondering about how the child was communicating his wants and needs. And I'm not sure if that was like before we got into breakouts or during breakouts, but did you have anything that you could add as far as communication skills, Jamie?
Yeah, he could communicate fine. He actually was evaluated for speech therapy services and tested out. He didn't qualify for speech therapy because there was this question of receptive and expressive language. Was he really getting in what he needed to get in order to respond correctly? He tested a little on the low average, but it wasn't enough to qualify for services. So verbally, he was fine. It's just, he just ramps up super quick.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for clarifying that for us. What about your group, Tanya?
Well, everyone really touched on the strengths. The one thing that we had that wasn't on the list is that the child is pretty charismatic and intelligent, and he does have social skills because he's really good at making friends. So that's something that could be built on. As far as strategies, we have with occupational therapy, doing more peer-to-peer interaction to help improve those social skills that he has. And then we were on the PCIT train as well, to especially help with, the hitting and some of his transitions and helping with the emotional regulation and following instruction. We talked about praising and encouragement for the parents and building on their strengths and the child's strengths. And then we also talked about conscious discipline as well. So.
All right. Excellent. Caroline?
Amanda's going to report for us if she's at. There she is. Go for it, Amanda. Thank you.
I think we already talked about all the child strengths. Some of the strengths that we had for the family are there's a strong relationship within the family, and the family seems to have high expectations. And then the family really wants what's best for the child. Some of the birth mom strengths that we had come up with is that she was willing to give honest information about past history, and it seems like she wants what's best for the child as well. Some of the strategies that we came up with was monitor and observe the child in preschool and implement positive supports in the classroom. Options for the preschool teachers like education and guidance on how to work with the child. And then some of the resources that we came up with were getting case management involved with the family, maybe even helping the family with peer support services, somebody with lived experience, and then early childhood mental health therapist.
Great. Sharon, anything from your group that has not been shared already? Because I'm seeing some overlap.
Yeah, Beth is our spokesperson. Were there some things in there?
Okay, Beth.
There was a few other things. We had very similar strengths to everybody else. I think we didn't get to resources because we wanted to do more digging. We weren't convinced that Montessori was maybe the best fit for him, and wanted to look a little more into why the behaviors were emerging if it wasn't a language issue. And given what Jamie was just reporting, there might still be some issues, even though he has the language, with his actual utilization of it that's leading to some frustration and things like that. It may be a little too free flowing for him. He may need a little more structure. So looking into those kinds of things and working with the family on what's the best place, because they want him kindergarten ready and there's more than one way to get there. What's going to be the best for the strengths that he has and the challenges that they're working through. A social emotional evaluation just to kind of get some more understanding of what's going on in there. I think those were really the only things. Looking at those transitions, I think somebody brought up earlier, and what is it about those transitions that's causing these challenges? Is it every transition? Is it just some of them? What's it related to? What are we seeing in the classroom that they might also be seeing at home, or what are the differences? So we really kind of got hung up in more of a deep dive.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad you explored that.
One thing I would add to that as well is, given that they're sending him to private preschool, this is likely a family with may also have private insurance, and then maybe taking a look at accessing a psychologist comes from a developmental perspective, who is trained and able to do like a DC 0 to 5 and take a pretty comprehensive look at the relationship and the social emotional development within that context.
Look at all these ideas. All right. In the group that I was in, we talked a lot about the sensory type adaptations that could possibly be integrated into the environment, having a quiet area, like maybe even a tent, and just trying to identify what those triggers were so that that the child would be able to have a routine where they could feel safe and not overstimulated. And that could involve like sitting on a therapy ball potentially, or just kind of having a little bit of respite from, you know, any chaotic environment if that was a need. I mean, it's hard to tell because we don't know all the information on this little person. And then again, just like very, very specific instructions and helping them know what to anticipate as far as instructions, what's coming next. So those were some of the, and then appropriate professional development for staff in the program. And there's lots of different ways to go there. But sensory and kind of self-regulation topics were mentioned by our particular group. All right, I know that I may not have touched every single group, but I did want to circle back because on our evaluation feedback, we really wanted to be responsive to that, and folks were interested in hearing what our presenter, what our expert of the day would say about the particular case. So Jason, if you're still here, we'd love to hear your impressions to tie it up with a bow.
Well, again, I think one of our community partners has a great slogan, Voices of Hope. It's that we're hope dealers. And, I think that anybody who's working with families like these is that we bring a sense of hope that change is possible and that change can happen. And I think that when we enter in, we've come up, such a big panel of experts. We have a lot of great ideas, but a lot of it is how do you help a family buy into those ideas? How do you help maybe a school or teachers buy into some of those ideas? And a lot of that is having those conversations that can be, they can be difficult. Sometimes I think we can create some of the difficulty in our brain before we even have those conversations. We already anticipate the difficulty. But when we come into it, recognizing where people are on that stages of change, then that helps us know what kind of response we have. If the parents are kind of pre-contemplative about maybe a school change, but we can help get them to that place of contemplation where we're thinking about, hey, maybe there's some other options here. If a teacher is, maybe contemplating and then maybe help them get them into a place of taking preparation and action. So this is some interventions that we would like to try, but all those, require a conversation and understanding where everybody's at with whatever particular intervention or whatever particular suggestion we have. And so having those conversations and knowing how to have those conversations, I think is really key to affecting change. But what we bring with us and foundationally under that is that we believe that change is possible for any family, for any child, any parent that we're working with. And then how we go about affecting that change, comes, I think an understanding, how change happens. So, thank you.
Well, thank you, and thanks for giving us the steps to have those conversations. We really, really appreciate it. And thank you does anybody else have any questions or comments, something that maybe we didn't share prior to Jason's final remarks there? We still have a couple of minutes.
As Harold Kleiner, I have a real quick comment. I was thinking what Beth Anna said and then what Jason said in terms of the difficult conversations and the discrepancy. And it just really hit me that the family really wants this child to be kindergarten ready, and this notion, no, there's more than one way to be kindergarten ready. And in fact, they chose the Montessori program because of it's a good place for terms of academics and social growth. But if the child is hitting peers and can't transition, those are that's a discrepancy. That's the two most fundamental issues in terms of being kindergarten ready. And so maybe that's what you need to go from the pre-contemplative to the contemplative stage in terms of these are the things that are going to absolutely prevent the child from being kindergarten ready. I was having a hard time connecting Jason's thing to our case study, and now it's finally hit me how they connect. I'm sorry.
Thank you for your feedback, Harold. All right. Well, I think we will turn it over to Emily for her to just take us home.
All right. So in a few minutes, or I should say within the next hour, I will send out the evaluation. Again, please check your junk folder, and if you don't get the link, just email me directly and I'll email you the link. So we do have incentives. There is a drawing after each session, and there's for somebody who attends all sessions and completes all evaluations, that's the key, you will receive a book. Well, there'll be a drawing for a book, right, Christine? Not everybody receives.
No, everyone will receive a book that's participated in all 7 sessions. Yes.
Perfect. Everybody receives a book if you come to every session. So
a book of their choice.
Of their choice. From 4, right? You get to choose from 4. Yes. Okay. And then Leah Dye won the door prize this time. So congratulations. And if you need certificates of attendance, just reach out to us. Me or Brandon can provide those for you. And I think that's about it. Oh, yes, perfect. So our next session is Monitoring Child Development with Dr. Jennifer Grisham. So we look forward to that. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to Caroline, Christine, Brandon, or I. Also, feel free to bring non-technical or like presentation questions. You could talk about those in Slack, and maybe that would be a good chance to kind of open up the discussion there. I have seen people joining, but it seems like, that's a place for you to provide the content. So we just kind of moderate it. We don't initiate it. So. All right.
Yeah, so feel free to share resources with us. It's a great place to post and to be able to access that information and use it as you can.
Yes. And thank you so much for coming today. We appreciate you.
All right. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.